following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
We now call to order the Planning and Zoning Board meeting for November 16th. We shall begin tonight with adopting our agenda. Anyone have any changes or suggestions? No? Then I would entertain a motion to adopt our agenda.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimously. So now we move on to approving our minutes. We have two sets of minutes. We have the work session on October 12th. Let's take that one first. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes, any amendments, edits, anything like that? If not, a motion would be in order next.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the minutes for the work session on October 12th, please say aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously as well. We will now move to our minutes for the regular meeting on October 19th. Anyone have any changes or suggestions, edits, anything of that nature for those minutes? No? Then I would like to hear a motion to approve those.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously as well. We will now move on to our items that carry a public hearing. And before we do so, I will explain a few of the rules that we have for those. So the first thing we're going to do with these public hearings is have our staff member come and speak to us for a while, and then I will open the public hearing after the staff person has addressed us. At that point, the applicant will present their case. They will have 10 minutes to speak to us about this particular case. After the applicant has made their presentation, then we will allow those of you out in the audience to come in and speak to the particular case that we're discussing. At that time, you will go up and please give a card to the clerk. There's some cards available up on the left there that you will also provide your name when you come up to the podium as well. Please give us your name as well. And then you will have 5 minutes to speak. We'll ask you to stand at the part of the podium that is currently unoccupied, not where our staff member is at the moment. And the reason we want you to do that is because there's a small timer over there, and that is a 5-minute timer. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, you will get a yellow light. That will give you 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts. When that light turns red, we will ask you to finish whatever point you're on and then move on. We don't do that to stifle anybody, but it's just that we need to have assurances that everyone has the fair amount of time to speak. So in the name of everyone getting 5 minutes, we will watch that clock fairly closely. We would ask you to be concise. If you have a number of people with the same point, perhaps you have a spokesperson come down and signify how many other folks you have with you. That would save a little time. You can also just have one spokesperson, as I said, talk to you When you speak to us, please speak to the entire board, not just to one of us. And also, we will not interact with you. First of all, we don't want to take up your time. And secondly, it's our time to listen to what you have to say. So there will not be an interaction. You will just speak to us and give us your remarks and your comments. After that's done, then we will close the public hearing and we'll have another discussion with the staff and with the applicant. So with that in mind, if I haven't forgotten anything, just any of the board members chime in and let me know. But if not, we will move on to our first case, which is 15 CPA 04. Ms. Gruber-Chandler, hello.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a comprehensive plan amendment request for 6.8 acres on 7711 Carpenter Fire Station Road. The subject property is located on the south side of Carpenter Fire Station Road, about 200 feet west of the intersection with Green Level Church Road. Notification of this plan amendment request was sent to properties shown in yellow on this map. And this slide shows stream buffers and floodways within and around the subject property. As per the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan, there is an existing street side trail near the subject property. And as per our comprehensive transportation plan, Carpenter Fire Station Road is an existing major thoroughfare. There is a future C-Tran route planned on Green Level Church Road. As per the Northwest Area Plan, the current land use designation is medium-density residential. That's single-family attached or detached housing between 3 and 8 units per acre. The applicant proposes to change the land use designation to office and institutional. At the Town Council public hearing at the end of September, 4 people spoke. 1 speaker noted this request would meet a need for office space in the area, and 3 citizens spoke on behalf of their neighbors. They were not opposed to the request. They did have some concerns, and most of their concerns related to rezoning or site plan issues, not to the plan amendment request. Our land development ordinance cites 4 criteria to look at when determining whether or not a comprehensive plan amendment is necessary. Staff believes the first one is met, so changes in projections or assumptions. When the Northwest Area Plan was adopted in 2002, there is less office space now than what we had anticipated back then. So both medium-density residential and office and institutional could provide a foundation for appropriate zoning and future development in this area. However, with limited office space nearby, additional office development could be an asset to this part of Northwest Cary. So staff does recommend approval of this comprehensive plan amendment request. So this concludes the staff presentation. So the applicant, I believe the applicant is here.
We will now open the public hearing. The applicant will speak first.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Michael Birch with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the applicant. Just again want to thank staff for their presentation and reiterate that our request is to go from medium density residential to office and institutional. We believe this change is warranted based on the lack of office uses that have been built out in the Cary Park Activity Center. And also, it's warranted based on all the comprehensive plan policies that encourage office uses in close proximity to residential. Again, serves as an appropriate transition, both from the existing bank parcel and the thoroughfares there, the major intersection, to the residential. It'll provide a balance to the mix of uses in the area. It'll serve the employment demand in this portion of Northwest Cary. And again, it will advance the goals of the activity center to locate employment and office uses in close proximity to residential. As you heard, there is a parallel zoning case, and we have been in contact and communication with our neighbors there. Received an email today that they are supportive of this and the rezoning, and we're not intending to show up tonight because of that, so I wanted to pass that along as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this public hearing? Seeing no one stand up to that, I will close the public hearing, and we will now begin our discussion. Anyone have any questions for our staff? Any comments at all?
Yeah, do we know what the approximate office space square footage that's in use or that's been proposed in this area that has been built to date?
I am not sure. We don't have that information as part of the comprehensive plan amendment request.
Staff report indicates 15,000 square feet.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? If not, would someone care to make a motion one way or the other?
I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 15-CPA-04 to Town Council with recommendation for approval to amend the land use plan as proposed.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Sure, I'll second it.
Any discussion?
This seems like a good use to me. I drove by there today, and I think it'll fit in nicely. I agree with staff's comments that, it could help balance out some of the retail in this area.
I also think it's a good use for the land.
Anyone else with anything to discuss on this motion? If not, then I shall call it for a vote. All those in favor of adopting this CPA amendment, would you please say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now on to our second case, 15 REZ 08. Ms. Grannon, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a request to rezone property located at 555 Crossroads Boulevard on approximately 2.57 acres. The subject property is shown here, highlighted in yellow. As you can see, it's south of Interstate 40. Here's an aerial view of the subject property. It is currently vacant. The site is not impacted by any stream buffers, according to Cary's most recent GIS maps. And the subject property has frontage on Crossroads Boulevard, which is an existing thoroughfare. This shows you the existing transit route in the proximity of the subject property. And there are no issues with Cary's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan. The land use plan designation for the property is general commercial. The existing zoning is general commercial. The property is located in the Crossroads Regional Mixed Use Activity Center. The proposed zoning is MXD, Mixed Use District. The reason the applicant has offered this zoning rather than going with general commercial zoning is because they're seeking a 6-story hotel with a maximum of 70 feet in height. Under the general commercial zoning, they would be limited to a 35-foot building height. But by being in the mixed-use overlay district, they can seek this MXD zoning and come forward with a preliminary development plan for your consideration. So this is the preliminary development plan that's been submitted. It shows the location of the building footprint of the hotel, the parking layout, buffers, associated BMP. There are a number of proposed modifications to LDO standards. The first one is the thoroughfare corridor buffer. The requirement along Interstate 40 is for a 100-foot buffer. They are proposing to have grading in the outer 20 feet of that buffer, and that is because there's an existing sewer line running through that area. They have proposed a 20-foot type C streetscape rather than the LDO standard of a 30-foot. This is consistent with other development that's existing in the neighborhood. As I mentioned earlier, they're proposing a 6-story, 70-foot hotel. The land development ordinance requirement is for a 35-foot height maximum within 100 feet of a residential zone district. There's one row of 16 contiguous parking spaces. The ordinance typically limits this to 14 contiguous spaces. And then they've asked for reductions to the typical standard for parking and vehicular use setbacks from perimeter buffers. And then there's one minor parking area setback from the building between 6 to 8 feet, and that's just on one location of the building, which I'll indicate when I show you the plan again. They've also asked for approval from the council of champion tree removal on the subject property. When this plan was presented to town council, at that time, it was thought that there were 4 champion trees on the property. The applicant has had the site resurveyed, and an arborist has determined that one of the trees did not meet the definition of a champion tree. It did not meet the measurement requirements, and it also had some health issues. So the stars indicate the location of 3 champion trees on the property that the applicant is seeking permission for removal. In evaluating the request, staff looked at the Crossroads Regional Activity Center and took into consideration the existing mix of uses that were in place currently, and specifically looking at the number of existing hotel and motel rooms. What's proposed by this plan would add 108 rooms to the existing 567 and bring the proposed total to 675. So with this kind of activity center, this is an appropriate use in terms of that area and what it's serving. The yellow areas show you the properties that received written notification. The property was posted. At the town council public hearing, there were concerns expressed by an attorney representing the adjacent apartment complex about the building height and what sort of visual impact that would have on the residents of the adjacent apartment complex. This is a photograph that shows you the location of the existing Crossroads apartment complex, 3-story buildings. This is the shared driveway that comes off of Crossroads Boulevard and would go into the site of the future proposed hotel if approved. Here's an aerial view that helps to illustrate where that shared road is and the location of the hotel, or the location of the apartments next to the proposed hotel site. The applicant provided a cross-section to illustrate that there is a row of existing trees in between the apartments and the hotel. When this was first presented to town council, they had proposed a 15-foot type C buffer. They've modified the plan and increased the proposed buffer now to a type B, which is a semi-opaque buffer. So since the town council meeting, that buffer has increased from a type C to a type B. And then, as I mentioned, one of the 4 trees was determined not to meet the definition of a champion tree. This illustrates the location of the buffer area that I just mentioned. This concludes staff's presentation. Once the applicant has made their comments, then after the public hearing, I'll be available for your questions.
We'll now open the public hearing on this case, and we'll begin with the applicant.
Good evening. I'm David York with Smithmore Leatherwood. Appreciate staff's presentation. It's fairly thorough. With me tonight, with Parks Hospitality Group, the proposed developers of the hotel site, are Ramesh Patel and Shanak Patel, and the engineer of record, Harold Yell, is also here with us to answer any questions you all might have. As indicated, the presentation by staff was fairly thorough. We believe that this is an appropriate transitional use between the auto dealership and the high-density apartments. I think they're a little over 18 units to the acre, so it's a nice high-density apartment complex. The site was challenging, and the engineers have pushed the building as far away from the existing residential apartment building as possible. You'll notice most of the adjacent apartment building would be overlooking parking surface as opposed to structure. We feel like if you look at the cross-section that was provided, which slide is that? I want to mess your presentation up. There, thank you. If you notice, Mr. Yellen, he can speak to this more if you have questions of him specifically. He went out and took pictures of the property to see exactly what the tree canopy height was and so forth before he prepared this cross-section. And it is to scale. And you would see that the sight lines are such that we feel like the existing vegetation as well as the increased plantings will obscure the view in a substantial way to minimize the visual impact of the proposed hotel site to these few apartment dwelling units. And again, we've increased the buffer type to attempt to address concerns of the neighbors to the south. The Parks Hospitality Group, they own two of the other hotel facilities that are in the area, the Hilton Gardens and the DoubleTree. And so they know exactly what the market demands are for hotels in this area, and obviously feel that the market could support some additional hotel rooms. And so we've had discussions with folks about the appropriate use to go between the two existing uses and feel like this is a great use for that. It'll be a substantial investment in the town, and we would hope that you could recommend approval for that. We're welcome to answer any questions you might have at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone care to speak on this case in our public hearing? If so, please provide a card to our clerk and come on down.
Good evening. I'm Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe Adams and Bernstein in Raleigh. We are here to make some comments on behalf of the apartments at Crossroads, the apartment that expressed some concerns at the public hearing before the council. And we'd like to highlight the concerns mainly attributed to the height and the buffer that have been proposed tonight. We're not opposed to the use necessarily, but feel that the 6-story height is inappropriate for the context of this site, and that the existing buffer is such that the views would be obstructed, and we don't currently have the views of any other buildings around that area. The proposed buffer would allow too much infiltration and views to the actual, not only the site, the parking lot, but also the walls of the proposed hotel. And so we'd like to illustrate why the zoning fails those two proposed criteria. And the first criteria is that the section 4.5.2E. The proposed height is simply not appropriate for this context and location. If you look at the existing heights around the area, and in fact on the first page of that photo shows a panoramic view of the site along Crossroads Boulevard, and juxtaposed with the diagram in the comprehensive land use plan 7.3, which shows how the principle of transitioning heights away from a regional activity center should be done. And the way they should be done is that as you move away from the bustle and the intensity of a regional activity center and the heights that are usually accompanied with that and the intense uses accompanying, you should drop down in scale as you approach the outer fringes to less intensive uses, such as a residential complex that we have. And what you have here is the 3-story apartment complex to the east. You have a 1 to 2, maybe 2-story car dealership to the west. Across from Crossroads Boulevard, you have a 1, maybe 2-story theater, and then the majority of the regional activity site is predominantly 1 stories, maybe 2 as you get to the big box stores. And so instead of that transition down, what you have is a 6-story use thrust into the middle of a very low-lying area, and you don't have that transition down that section 7.3 of the comprehensive plan states. That same section also states that buildings at the outer edge of an activity center should be compatible in height and mass to the surrounding neighborhood, and that non-residential buildings outside of the activity centers should be compatible with height and mass to adjacent properties. And instead, what we have here, again, you've seen all of the variations that the applicant is seeking. They're trying to propose a use which they've determined is helpful in this area, but on a very small site. And they're trying to squeeze that both horizontally and vertically into a place that we just simply don't think it belongs adjacent to a residential complex. And for that reason, we think the height fails to satisfy that criteria. We also feel it fails to satisfy criteria 3.4.1E, criteria 5, and that it significantly adversely affects the apartment complex by diminishing the views of its residents. If you'll turn to the second page of the photos that we took from the site, you'll see that we've included the applicant's cross-section of the property that was submitted and shown to you just a few moments ago on the bottom of the page. And we've juxtaposed that with another view approximately the same vantage point and scale of the existing complex and the buffer that it enjoys. And what you'll see now is that the three-story complex does have several trees that would be located in that proposed 15-foot buffer. And they're significant trees, they're mature trees, but it's not completely dense and opaque. You can see through now. But what you see through to is a very nice evergreen and deciduous mix of very significant old-growth trees. So the people that were living in that apartment, and when that apartment was developed, we knew we'd have some sort of development in the future, but according to the zoning criteria at that time, it did support a conclusion that there would be this commercial kind of 35-foot, three-story development that might go in that wouldn't be so visible from our third floor or for the people on the first or second floors. And instead, what you'll have is, in place of those old-growth trees on the top, you'll have the six-story building that you'll be looking through. And while we appreciate the fact that the buffer is proposed to be about 15 feet, we think it still significantly impacts the value of our property and the views that our residents will currently enjoy. And for that reason, we request that the board recommend denial of the proposed zoning. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'll keep those with you, we have our Vice President to speak about the second two pictures.
Good evening. Greg Nichols, 5405 Etta Burke Court in Raleigh. I'm Vice President of GCI Residential, who was the developer and planner and the constructor of that community that's being impacted by the proposed hotel. We feel that it is obviously adversely affecting at least one of our buildings. We always expected the property to be developed, but we expected it to be developed consistent with the existing zoning regulations, which allowed for the maximum of 3 stories at 35-foot height. In fact, we relied upon that existing zoning when we were making our decisions. And I think it's accurate to say that if a 6-story hotel had been on that site at the time we were prepared to build, we would not have built on that site, or at the very least, we would never have designed a building to face directly, a 6-story building. So we are an existing use for residential. The hotel is proposed as a use 5. The LDO requires, I think, a 30-foot buffer. They're asking for a 15-foot buffer. Type B buffer, the type B buffer that they're proposing calls for, from the LDO, a semi-opaque screen from the ground at least 6 feet in height. We will have residences living above the 6 feet in height. If you look at the exhibit of the elevation between the two buildings, you see the limbs of the tree far extend past the 15-foot, the drip line. So when when that retaining wall is built, the roots will be disturbed, and the fact that those trees will live is probably fairly small. The Type B buffer allows would allow for clearing all the way to the property line. Not that I think they are proposing to clear all the way to the property line, but it does allow them to clear all the way to the property line and then revegetate. But we're talking about revegetating with 6-foot material. We think it adversely affects the 12 families that will live there or are currently living there or will live there in the future. You know, we just feel that zoning is not appropriate for this particular size building that's less than 100 feet from our residence looking up. So I urge you to deny this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in this public hearing? Seeing no one rise, I'll invite the staff back to the podium, and we shall begin our discussion. Any questions? Yes.
On the champion tree removal, are the three I tried to go back to your the slide where it showed where the champion trees were, the three that are going to be, they want to remove. Are those in the buffer?
No.
No? Okay. And then does a Type B buffer allow you to clear to the property line and then replant?
I'm not sure where that came from. I don't believe the applicant is planning on clearing. Typically, when a buffer is proposed, they will retain that buffer. So, and that is correct. They have not proposed to clear to the property line. So, and a point of clarification, because this is in a mixed-use overlay district, there are no buffer requirements because it's in the MXD activity center. So any types of buffers that are being proposed, the idea of an activity center is that uses don't have those same buffer requirements so that the uses can be integrated. It's not always ideal if you've got a hotel and an apartment complex, but when you've got retail next to residential, sometimes the minimizing buffers is a good thing. So the building height is really the big issue here rather than the buffer.
Okay. And then just one further question. So they're going to be utilizing the same, or the proposal is to utilize the same driveway into the apartment complex?
That's correct. That's the way the site was set up. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
With the idea of champion trees, isn't that if they are removed, there's supposed to be a certain number and type of trees replanted, and where will they be?
Correct. Well, they've got buffer area for planting opportunities within that 30-foot area. They've got a streetscape. They've got a small buffer area adjacent to the car dealership.
Okay, so just because they're being removed doesn't mean there's not going to be equal amount of...
Right. There's the inch-for-inch replacement, but that's correct. Mm-hmm.
I guess to follow up on that, as I look at this, at the proposal before us, I mean, what my visceral reaction is that we're being asked to allow this and allow the variation for height, for vertical, as well as at the same time we're pushing everything horizontal, because even though I understand that it's a mixed-use overlay district, it seems like virtually every buffer that's in that district's been, there's being asked for basically to modify that, to reduce it. And even looking at that 15-foot buffer between the apartment and the proposed site, I mean, 15 foot does not allow a lot for drip line. That was the first thing. I walked that site on Saturday. There's not a very robust tree line within that 15 foot immediately on that property line. And so I am a little curious how we're going to get to a Type B and it'd be fairly limited. And looking at the spaces for, as was brought up before, about the champion tree and some sort of amenities or some for some consideration there. There's not a lot of space to be able to put much of anything. I mean, they're asking for a 20-foot buffer on the front. There's, I mean, what I see is that we have, and I understand it isn't a mixed-use overlay, but asking to go up, and then there's not much to put anything else in terms of vegetation. Everything's just being pretty much squeezed in. So, as I look at the proposal to go to a type B, looking at other plantings, there's not a lot of place to put anything. So I'm trying to reconcile it for myself about not only the height but also the footprint itself, and trying to see how some of these buffers are actually going to work in reality.
Was there a specific question or just observation?
So I guess as for the staff, I mean, we've got a 15-foot buffer that's going to be cut into there. I mean, what is the thought in terms of the existing trees?
They have the opportunity. They have the opportunity to ask for development that is consistent, as you stated. Let's just start with the streetscape, that it mirrors what's existing on either side. So the car dealership has the same streetscape as the apartment complex. So we didn't raise any eyebrows over that. It's reasonable to expect that you're going to pull the buildings up closer to the street in an activity center. That's pretty typical. The apartment complex only provided a 10-foot buffer, which is something they were able to do because they were in an activity center as well. So the 15-foot buffer is something that's been offered by the applicant. It's a question for you whether or not you think this is appropriate, whether or not you think this is a good fit, the combination of the use and the building height. There is a significant area that's impacted because of the requirement for 80 feet of thoroughfare corridor buffer with that 20-foot easement through it. So that helps to explain why they're seeking that same design that was granted for both the car dealership and the apartment complex. Yes, it is a restricted site. It is tight. They've asked for some minor modifications to LDO standards. For example, this is the row of the 16 contiguous parking spaces. We didn't have any big concerns over that because it's hidden from the street for the most part. The champion tree removals, when they're right in the center of a fairly small property, it's very difficult to maneuver around that. So that was not anything that staff had any concerns over. Our biggest concern, and we raised this with the applicant, was the building height and how it would work with the adjacent neighborhood. And they came back with increasing the buffer opacity. But yes, it is a very restricted site in terms of the size.
I have a question. Yes. Ms. Gannon, if the car dealership to the south wanted to put in an additional parking lot on this property, would they have to come before the council to do that?
They would, yes, they would have to go through a preliminary development plan as well if it was, well, it would have to be, they couldn't just have a parking lot by itself, but if they wanted to purchase the property and expand.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is, should this card, the contention of the developer is we wouldn't have built unless we felt there was going to be a 3-story building there. Nothing more than a 3-story building.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So what I'm getting at is,
what could they do today with
a piece of property? You got a car dealership next door. Were they in an expansion mode? Could they have put a parking lot in here?
Or expanded the dealerships? Yeah, they could. Yes, it's general.
Clear that lot.
Yes, it is general commercial zoning.
Right.
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
And the buffer would be non-existent.
They would, if they wanted, right. If they wanted modifications to LDO standards, then they would have to come back through the MXD process.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Looking at this, and this is a question, this whole thing about pervious surface and the percentage of, is that applicable to this situation? Because it looks like it's all paved. Do we need to worry about that with parking lots?
That is something that I'll have to defer to our stormwater engineers at the time of development plan review.
Oh, okay.
I haven't researched that.
Okay.
And it's not totally paved in that, I mean, this is
That's also part of it.
This is all buffer. No, this is the thoroughfare corridor buffer in here, so.
So that would make the percentages better. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have those details yet.
That's okay. A few more questions? Anybody? We've had the discussion before that height of stories don't equal height of building. So when
Correct.
you mentioned that the theater is probably only 2 stories, what's the actual height of that compared to this building being approved? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking, it's just stories, and when I think of that, an 8-foot house story, it could be a bit much taller already.
Right.
And we're thinking.
I'd have to guess at that, so
Well, that's where I'm kind
certainly
of
get back to
guessing, too,
you.
that the height of the theater may not be what we normally think of as just 2 stories.
Anything else? Anyone else?
Oh, yes, I have one more question.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sure.
So with this 6-story building, are they blocking any sun? I mean, it seems like the direction this building is facing, that they're not directly south of them, or it's just a view issue. It's not a sun or a light issue. It's just.
That is a question for the applicant, I believe. And I didn't quite understand.
If it was directly facing, if this 6-foot story building was in south of this apartment complex, I could see where it's blocking light or making them live in the. But which way is this compared to direction of the building? The hotel to the existing apartment complex?
Hi, my name's Harold Yell.
Hi.
I was tasked with trying to figure out how to get this on the site and meet all the ordinances that we could possibly meet. To answer your first question, we only have 55% impervious area on the total tract area.
Okay, thank you.
Just to answer that, so we're not paving the whole thing. Your question about air, light, sound?
Which way is it facing? Looks like this is not blocking any light or.
Well, I can't see my north arrow on there, but I believe we have this thing oriented north and south, so this would lie to the west of the singular apartment building of the apartment site. As far as the light, I don't think it would impact anything except in the late afternoon, which, by the way, the trees by that time would be impacting and shading those apartment buildings from the heat of the sun during the summer months. During the winter, I'm not sure. The sun's going to be a little lower in the sky. I think the trees that are to the west of the building are going to impact the amount of sunlight that's going to be received by those apartment buildings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I'll jump in with my very, hopefully, basic question. I just want to get to the difference between the existing or the proposed conditions and the LDO requirements. Those LDO requirements are LDO requirements of MXD or of GC?
In all zoning districts, when adjacent to residentially zoned property, the standard is a 35-foot maximum height. However, in the MXD district, you can ask for whatever you think is appropriate, whatever you think, the council and the planning and zoning board will, feel comfortable with. So there is the opportunity to ask for something higher than that when it's in an overlay district. Same thing's true for the buffer reductions. So those are standards that the LDO has in general commercial, but because they're asking for the MXD zoning, they have the opportunity to seek increases or modifications.
So that probably answers my second question, which is, I haven't seen things such as parking area setbacks and things like that show up in zoning before, but that's probably for the same reason. because of that flexibility.
Right. It's
Okay.
when it's accompanied by a preliminary development plan that gives us that high level of detail so we can see why the reductions are being requested. You can't just ask for reduction to town standards in a straight rezoning, but if it's in a mixed-use overlay district and they've gone through the process of submitting a plan that locks in that building placement and helps to illustrate what can be expected, then they have the opportunity to seek the modifications.
And then just my third follow-up to that, it was mentioned a little earlier that I believe it was the streetscape is currently the streetscape for the apartment complex and the streetscape for the auto dealership are the same, and they're just looking
20 feet.
to be the same. So one is zoned MXD, one is zoned general commercial, but those
Well,
sort of
prior
subcategories
to
are-
the MXD, we had activity center concept plans, we had mixed-use sketch plans, so all that while being within an activity center.
Right, and that's
So-
flexibility
right,
comes into play.
Right, exactly.
So you can't have those things.
Increased density, for example, typical RMF density would be 12 dwelling units per acre. Because it was in an activity center, the apartment complex could increase their density. I think the applicant stated 18. I'll have to verify that. But the opportunity to increase the density comes because it's located in an activity center.
Excellent, thank you. That's all I have. Does anyone else have any other questions for applicants or
I got a question
staff?
for the developer.
Yes. For the applicant? Yes.
No, for the apartment developer. Mr. Nichols, was it? Yeah, can I just,
I suppose we can.
how many units are in this entire apartment complex?
The community has 344 suites,
Okay. And how many are in this building that's impacted by this
22 suites.
22? What's the average duration of your tenant lease?
Well, I can't answer that accurately, but I can give you my best guess.
It's fine.
18 months. We don't give in, I don't think we allow anything less than 12. Many come for 5 years or longer, but many come for 1 year also. So I don't have statistics on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions or comments? If not, would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Make sure I have the right one here. I move that the board forward case number 15 REZ-08 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
Motion is second. Discussion, please.
So this one gave me pause. Anytime I see a building height doubled and the request for the rezoning, for the purpose of squeezing something in that nobody, expected, that, I spend a lot of time thinking about this and looking at the site. But in this case, for this particular parcel, in this particular location, I think the proposal is appropriate. On my way there, I passed several similar properties. Maybe they were a little bit larger lots, but they looked natural in that setting. And I drove through the apartment complex, and with the exception of those few apartments facing that tree line, the rest of the apartments seem to be overlooking I-40 or a major road, or the majority of them were overlooking parking lots and directly into other apartments. So, I understand that there are a few premium, balconies in this back, but the closeness of that buffer really limits, their sight line even going up. I tried to, picture what it would like if I were standing on that balcony trying to look up. So I think the damage is minimal. These are apartments. People can choose not to be there, if they don't want to, because the rest of the apartments don't seem to have this same type of view. I don't think they're going to have, a trouble filling them. I don't know if they're charging a premium price. That's not really my concern. But, overall, I think it works. I know they squeezed it in, but it seems like a good use and a good transition.
I'm just going to mimic what Carla said. I had a little bit of hesitation as well, but I think it's an adequate use for the property, being that it's small, and I know that area needs the additional rooms. The impact to the residents that are presently in that apartment is of concern, but again, when there's only a few one building, I believe, or two that are impacted. So I think it's a good use for the property. I'm not happy with the champion trees being removed, but I understand that where they're located, it's understandable, and so for that, I'll support it.
Do we have any other discussion on this motion? None? Then I shall call it to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I oppose.
So we are 6 or 7 to 1 tonight. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We shall now move on to our third case, 15 REZ06.
Thank you. This is the rezoning request for approximately 3.74 acres located at 7421 O'Kelly Chapel Road and Green Level Church Road. Subject property is shown here highlighted in yellow. And an area view shows the property on the south side of O'Kelly Chapel Road. According to Cary's most recent GIS maps, there is a slight impact with a stream buffer, which would need to be determined at the time of development plan review. Cary's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan identifies a future greenway trail along the southern portion of the property and a multi-use trail adjacent to Green Level Church Road. O'Kelly Chapel Road and Green Level Church Road are both thoroughfares, and there is a proposed future C-Tran route along Green Level Church Road. Cary's land use plan designation identifies the property for mixed use and for high-density residential, medium-density residential, I'm sorry. The current zoning is a mixture of a portion of the Amberley PDD and Residential 40. The applicant has proposed to submit a preliminary development plan and ask for MXD, mixed-use district zoning. So similar to the case we just heard, with the request for the rezoning comes this preliminary plan that locks in some specifics as to the type of use, the building location, where the parking areas are located, where the buffers are located, et cetera. The plan proposes an 8,300 square foot daycare center, a 13,300 square foot two-story office building, and a Town of Cary Greenway easement within the 50-foot perimeter buffer on the southern side of the property. Modifications proposed by the applicant would increase the parking by 6.9% above the typical LDO standards. There's a portion of a gathering area within the streetscape at the corner of the property, and the proposed removal of one champion tree on the property. So this shows you the location of the champion tree removal. This is what was presented to the town council. There was a gathering area proposed that had this stamped concrete gathering area here. That has been modified slightly since the town council meeting. There's also a request from the applicant for an exemption to the off-site extension of a 10-inch reclaimed water line. The applicant has agreed to do the installation of the reclaimed water line on their property and connect to the west, but they have asked to be excused from the requirement to connect to the water line that's on the north side of O'Kelly Chapel Road. There was a traffic impact analysis conducted. There were a number of traffic improvements that were suggested by the traffic study. The applicant has proposed to address some of those improvements at O'Kelly Chapel Road and Green Level Church Road to provide an eastbound receiving through lane on the east side of the intersection. Modifications to the existing traffic signal to account for comprehensive transportation plan road widening. At site entrance number 1, which is at O'Kelly Chapel Road, restrict ingress and egress to right turns only, and to do the same restriction at the entrance number 2 to the site at Green Level Church Road. Property owners within 800 feet of the subject property were notified by mail. The property was posted. We had community feedback prior to the town council public hearing, 2 phone calls. One was a citizen who was concerned about the number of existing daycares in the vicinity, and there was one caller who was concerned about traffic. And then at the town council public hearing, we had a spokesperson from the Homeowners Association to the south who spoke about the neighborhood's concern for privacy. And then the council discussed the appropriateness of the stamped concrete gathering space within the streetscape. And then one council member asked for closer attention to be given to the champion tree on the property. I'd like to just point out the concern about privacy and the adjacent residential neighborhood to the south. This is the Horton's Creek Recreation Site, which is directly south of the office building. And what's a little bit hard to see here is per the PDD conditions, there was no buffer requirement. So while they've got buffering along their streetscape area, they were not required to install a buffer along their northern perimeter. And also there were reductions as part of the Hortons Creek PDD that instead of providing a landscape buffer in common open space, the residential homes in this neighborhood were required to provide a 15-foot landscape area. So there is a reduction to typical standards for that existing neighborhood to the south, and that helps to explain their concerns about wanting some additional privacy. There's an aerial view that helps illustrate the close proximity of some of the homes on the southern side of the site and the existing recreation site to the property. So you can see how there's been a good bit of tree clearing around the swimming pool area. This is a cross-section that was provided by the applicant to help illustrate the location of the swimming pool, location of the 2-story building, showing that it's going to be below the grade of the road, and helping illustrate that there will be some vegetation that helps reduce the visual impact from the office building to the swimming pool. So this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is present. The applicant has advised staff that they are interested in exploring the introduction of another zoning condition. So we'll hear that from them on that tonight. This does require a second public hearing because it is the MXD process. So this is a standard process. But if they discuss and present a new condition to you tonight, you can certainly discuss it, and then it can be something that council can take into consideration. So with that, we'll turn it over to the applicant if you have a question.
Yes, I have one. Just on that, if they propose the zoning condition, we can carry that forward to council, but we can also consider it as well, correct?
Sure. Yeah, it's going to be a public hearing tonight. They can certainly talk about your concerns, and there's been ongoing discussion from the neighbors about privacy and how to achieve the privacy and requirements for the Greenway Trail and things of that nature. But we want to make sure that what gets presented to council is not something that's a surprise to you, because if council is voting on something, they want to make sure that the Planning and Zoning Board had a good understanding of what was being requested.
Okay, well, we're good on that?
Okay.
All right, thank you. We'll open the public hearing now, beginning with the applicant.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for having us. My name is Patrick Perez, work with Mulkey Engineers here in town. We represent West Cary Holdings, the applicant. A couple of things we'd like to address first. We feel like our plan is in compliance with the Northwest Area Plan. We meet all the mixed-use overlay district design criteria. Several issues that have come up, especially recently. The Greenway Trail, as you see on the drawing above, we were in talks with staff today and understand that we are required to provide the Greenway Trail and the connection down to Horton's Creek, which we have shown. But in lieu of the Greenway Trail from the connection to Horton's Creek west, we would propose a easement, a 40-foot easement, which staff has agreed is still in compliance with the regulations. Additionally, we would like to propose a wooden fence to match the wooden fence that's on the Wellness Center to the west. We feel like this will help address the concerns of privacy with the neighbors. Let's see what else. The landscaping in between our site and that fence and all the neighbors to the south, all that will meet the opaque type A buffer standards. I think Deborah addressed the reclaimed water line we plan to build it upon development of the triangular piece, which our applicant also owns. Parking expansion that we have asked for here is so that we will have the possibility of possibly putting a medical office building in that office. We would like to have the flexibility to put something other than office, which is why we didn't specify medical here, but the medical office parking requirement is higher than a standard office parking requirement, so that's what we're showing at this point. I think that covers all of my issues. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone care to speak to this public hearing? If so, please let me know. Otherwise, we will close the public hearing and then begin our questioning. Oh, do we have someone else? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matt Boyer. I'm the Homeowner Association President for Horton's Creek, which is the property directly to the south. So it's good to hear that the applicant is giving consideration to our privacy concerns, but I want to just expound upon that a little bit. Again, I think the buffer that they've proposed here seems to be above the requirements that they're asking for, but I think one of the things that's driving our concern, and thus the request for fencing or some type of denser buffer or barrier, is that this Greenway Trail, although it does sound as if that's changing, our concern with a lot of that vegetation would be removed as part of the Greenway Trail. So again, just to kind of give a little more clarity to our concern. And as he pointed out, we have 4 homes that are directly abutting this property, and the developer, to Ms. Grandin's earlier point, really did not account for that as part of their plan. So, we've had citizens or residents, really express their concerns about folks being able to see in from that parking lot, and then the fact that it's a 2-story building and some of the topographical issues that you see in the kind of the sight lines into the pool, as well as the second floors of some of these homes. Again, really kind of the feedback we're getting from our residents. So again, Ms. Grandin and her staff have been very cooperative and open to our feedback, so we really appreciate that. And clearly the applicant is hearing some of our concerns, but just wanted to come up and reiterate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak to this? So used to looking this way.
Hi, my name is John Perna. I live at 412 Village Orchard Road. I live adjacent to the community pool in our complex. I'm not speaking tonight on behalf of anybody in our association. I have a conversation with the neighbors in the general area of the pool, the houses that will be directly behind the office building, and myself on the other side, along with a few other neighbors. This is a residential community. There's 90-plus homes. They're all single-family homes. And as I understand, the zoning for that area is residential. It's not, and this is a change to have an approval for an office facility. or more of a commercial use. Hortons Creek is a community of a lot of families, single-family homes, kids playing, and the office is just not in style or fit with the neighborhood. We would have a 2-story office building about 50 feet from our rear homes of the homes directly behind that, and we would be looking up at a 2-story office building as our kids were playing in the pool. Kids were utilizing the facilities and so forth, and the neighbors as well. And just making reference to the previous application, there were, I guess there was a lot of concern about a 6-story building in a commercial area, though, with a car dealership and so forth. There is no car dealership. There is no commercial use in that area. This is strictly a residential area. I'm adamantly opposed to this application, so I want to be on the record to say that. The neighbors that I've been speaking with are adamantly opposed to this application, especially a 2-story office building that we'll be looking directly up at. The Hortons Creek and green level goes in the area, it gets on an incline. So as Green Level Church goes up towards Old Kelly, it's a substantial hill going up, and that building will be sitting upon that hill. And I know that you said that there would be some type of, I guess, clearing of the ground and so forth to lower it, but in any case, it's going to be higher than the pool, the houses behind it, the houses across from the pool and so forth. It's going to affect quite a few homes in that area. It's just simply not in line with the community. And furthermore, the intersection itself, this would, to me, would put an obstruction at the intersection. It's a dangerous intersection. We've had many accidents there. And in the last application for Evans Farm across the street, they were required to put a traffic light in to help with the dangerous situation over there. And this building would present an obstacle for drivers in each direction, as it would totally take out the corner, and nobody would be able to have visibility down Old Kelly from Green Level Church Road. As it is as of today, you can go there anytime you'd like, around 8:30 in the morning. You'll see that traffic is backed up from Old Kelly on Green Level Church down to almost Waycroft, which is totally south. I would think that's south of Hortons Creek. With these cars coming out with the proposed egress, where they would be making right turns, how would they get back to take Old Kelly, going, I guess that would be west? They'd be going around the block and going right through our complex to get to where they would want to go, because they can't make a left turn coming out of the parking lot, from what I've just seen. So this is going to cause a traffic problem, more increased traffic in our community. There's going to be a school that's going to be eventually built in the vicinity. You're going to have school traffic and so forth, and this extra traffic is going to be a safety issue for kids in the school. People are going to be going on the cut-through street, which will be Hortons Creek Road. So there are many, many things going on here, and I think that your board should take a hard look at this. This is an application to change what is existing. It's to change it. It's a residential zoning area, and to change it to an office for an office complex and a daycare center, in my opinion, is unwarranted. We've already have one daycare center directly across the intersection. We have another daycare center on McCrimmon, right at Green Level Church, are probably less than a quarter of a mile apart. So to have another daycare center, a third daycare center, an office complex and so forth, I believe is unwarranted. And I don't believe that the board should consider the application in that it's changing that area from a residential area to a commercial or business area. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Glenda Topp with Glenda S. Topp and Associates. I was asked to help on the rezoning, so I just want to, I guess, address the comments made by the last gentleman and then make a few extra comments. I guess I want to start with the staff report. In the staff report, it talks about the future land use designation for the two of the parcels is medium density residential, and for the other two, it's mixed use. It is pointed out that daycare centers are allowed in residential uses, so that use is actually, could occur, with the current zoning. Also, the two westernmost properties are covered by the Northwest Area Plan, which is Note 4, and as it says in your staff report, intense mixed-use center will focus on commercial, retail, and office uses with some high-density housing, such as apartments, overshops, or offices. And then it goes on to say for mixed-use areas north of Kit Creek and west of Green Level Church Road, any residential should be limited to medium-density housing. All three parcels are located in the Amberley Community Mixed-Use Center, and these mixed-use centers do allow a mixture of uses. It was also pointed out in the staff report that the request is in conformance with the Northwest Area Plan. Therefore, this request, whether it be in a mixed-use activity center or not, would not have required, and staff may correct me if I'm wrong, would not require a comprehensive plan amendment. The applicant has addressed, some of the items that they were asked to look at with the traffic study. I know there's been further discussions about one of the improvements that were not being made, that they have not made, but they're working on an agreement with the town of Cary Traffic Department to look at a solution to that I believe staff will also or can address tonight. We believe that the one-story daycare and the two-story office building is appropriate for this location. Typically, your daycare is daytime, not weekends. Office is during the day. Nobody's there at nights or weekends. Usually you hear that those are two, at least from an office standpoint, people like to be near an office building because there is no one there at night and weekends, and that versus, houses that could be there where they could be much closer and could be, right by them. Again, we feel that the use is appropriate. The scale, the size is, to us, fits in with a surrounding residential area, and we would ask for the board's support.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else from any corner of the room? Seeing no one this time get up, I will close the public hearing, and now we can begin our discussion with staff and the applicant. Would anyone like to start us off?
I will. I agree that there's been a compelling case presented to describe what's proposed as being in compliance with the use designations for the area. However, a daycare center and office building will, without a doubt, add to the existing issues of traffic. You're going to be having everyone come in to the daycare at exactly the same time that there's already a problem, so you're adding, and there's no way you can get around that, to the early morning flow of traffic. And an office building 2 stories will contribute to that as well. I live in this area, and I can definitely say that that particular time of the morning is unlike any other time during the day. It's jam-packed at the T of O'Kelly Chapel and Green Level Church. So I think that we have to be very, very concerned about that, even with the proposals of the, limitations on which direction you can turn. That always results in people resourceful individuals, and people are going to figure out a way to make their turns, no matter where they are. If it means cutting through residential neighborhoods, they're going to do it. So we do, I think, my biggest concern with this is, in fact, the traffic, and I think it is something that has to be looked at very carefully going forward, especially with the very active development that's going on in this particular area of Northwest Cary. Every day, new developments are breaking ground. And so it's a very big issue. So I think we have to really think about it.
Can I follow up on her comments? I really don't understand the traffic here. I mean, it sounds like they're going to widen in front of their property, and then there are at least 2 spots on Green Level Church Road that are not widened. And I think one of them is immediately, I guess, to the south, assuming this is oriented correctly. But it looks like the land is already developed.
They are required to make improvements on their property frontage, and that's in your staff report under the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. So there are requirements for road widening, road improvement, sidewalk or multi-use trail improvements along both O'Kelly Chapel Road and Green Level Church Road. There is a gap, and Mr. Jensen with our Transportation and Facilities Department can speak to that a little bit. There was a transportation payment in lieu approved by Town Council in 2006 in lieu of those improvements because the road alignment was not finalized at that time. So that's something that was pointed out as a shortcoming out there, traffic improvement that would help the situation. So if Mr. Jensen's available, I can have him speak to the conversations that have been going on about that particular area.
So someone's already been paid for that improvement, it just hasn't been made.
Yes, correct. When Horton's Creek came in, the road wasn't realigned as it's configured today, and there was no way to actually physically build that. So Town Council provided an action back in 2006 that allowed the Horton Creek subdivision to make a payment in lieu for that missing section of widening that you see in front of there.
So does that mean that the town will widen it?
Doesn't obligate the town to, but it certainly is an opportunity if the town wishes to make an improvement there that we could consider it during our budget process.
Okay, because my concern is how is it ever going to be widened? Because it appears, like say, that land has already been basically developed. Yeah. So, you know, that gap really isn't acceptable in this situation.
Right. Yeah, we have gaps like that all along our thoroughfares as developers have done their frontage widening, so we do have a lot of gaps. We do evaluate every year during the budget cycle to look at gap widening that would have some strategic benefit for moving traffic. So again, all those things are part of the budget process, but most likely if it gets widened, the town will have some level of participation in doing that.
Okay, but just to be clear, the gaps that you were speaking of were gaps that exist in front of developable land that hasn't been developed. And in this case, is that land developable, or is that open space that belongs to the Hortons Creek and it won't?
It's not developable because that's the pool complex is located there. Right. So that, again, when that subdivision, Horton Creek subdivision came through, the council absolved them from making a physical improvement, but accepting the money because it just wasn't practical at that time to make that improvement.
Okay.
So
the only way that this is going to be widened basically is for the town to do it.
It could be, or if we convince the state DOT to do it. So most likely it will probably be gap widening could be done by the town.
Okay, thank you.
Before you leave, so on the intersection improvement recommendations, there were 8 bullet items, and the developer is proposing 3. In your opinion, is that adequate, or should more be done?
Well, as Ms. Hanson was saying, this area is quite dynamic. We've had several rezonings occur in this area, including the elementary school. A lot of the suggested improvements that showed up in the traffic study for the school also showed up in this study and some others in the area. Fortunately, a lot of the developments are each taking a portion of those improvements. It's very, very analogous to the Joaquina Road area that we had a while ago that everybody would seem to be doing a little bit apart. So right now we're in discussions with 4 developments that have had rezonings come through. They're eminent as far as wanting to do their work, and each are doing a portion of that work. We're working with them to try to come up with a coordinated approach to doing this so we don't
have piecemeal widening that doesn't make sense. So we're working through those logistics on that, but we haven't quite got a finalized plan. But just do know that there are some commitments that show up in this traffic study. There are also a commitment of the school, the Ridgefield Farm subdivision, the Evans Farm townhomes that is currently being built right now. You see them, they've already done most of their widening, so there is going to be a lot of dynamic things, particularly on O'Kelly Chapel Road, from Yates Store Road all the way through this intersection, that when it's fully completed by these developments, we'll have a 4-lane median divided roadway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Jensen's up here. Look, if I can have all our questions regarding traffic, and I'm sure there's more than a few, so we'll take care of those, so you don't have to keep going up and down.
Sure.
Mr. McFarland.
Yeah, thank you. I spent some time out there yesterday walking and trying to visualize, what's there now and what the applicant has proposed here, and then looking to see, okay, as you kind of described, it's puzzle pieces coming together. But I also feel that at some point there's, and this isn't necessary for the applicant, but it does relate to, the timing is like at some point becomes this tipping point of when these things need to come together. And so I was curious, when we get to the end of their south property line on Green Level Church Road, we have what they're proposing is on their traffic with that traffic islands, et cetera. Then it just ends in basically a stormwater ditch. And so we have this, almost like the problems that are out there become exacerbated by this piece. And I understand I see some critical pieces, because this, on the north side, Old Kelly Chapel Road, it connects with that median that's there by the Rex facility, seeing that come together. But it seemed, my sense was that it begins to, it gets worse before it gets better, potentially. And I'm just wondering, so in the arrangement that was made with the developer of Horton's Creek, particularly that section from Horton's Creek Road to this property, is there a timetable? When that next piece would be, or is that just?
No, it's that little piece in front of the rec center that wasn't built is basically when the council granted them ability to make a payment in lieu. That funds didn't go specifically towards a future improvement there, or there was no time schedule. That money basically went back into the town's general funds to be used for any thoroughfare improvement around the town. So again, as we look at gap widenings annually through the budget process, priorities will be set then, which are the highest priorities, and does council choose to fund certain types of gap widenings. So but I will tell you, we are having some ongoing discussions now about, with this development occurring and others in the area, is this an appropriate time for the town to maybe partner and do some of this work? But those are just very initial thoughts, and nothing's been brought before council or anything like that. But there is some initial thoughts that maybe that's a good time to partner with it when you've got so many other things going on.
There's one other question, then I'll let somebody else ask Mr. Jensen. I think the applicant talked about doing some upgrades to the street, to the traffic intersections, signals. Was that part of it? Did I read that correct?
Well, when you basically touch the intersection with Green Level Church Road, O'Kelly, they're going to have to upgrade the signal equipment, because you're adding more lanes, and assignment of lanes are differently. So, yeah, there'll be some upgrades to the equipment there. There's still that little triangular piece in the southeast corner that's kind of in no man's land. No one's really, it's somewhat too small to build anything on it. It's kind of in a unique shape. So there is some, that is the one quadrant of the intersection that hasn't been identified for development yet. So that's a challenge, and that may be one of those. If maybe we'll have somebody step forward and want to build something unique there. If not, that'll probably end up being another one of those gap widenings that either the state or the town of Cary looks at us during their funding to do that type of improvement. I do know that the Ridgefield Farms development is actually going to be adding a second northbound through lane on Green Level Church Road. So we will then, as soon as they they're already starting their development. They'll be building that second lane going northbound. So again, collectively, as all these developments do their improvements, I think you will see some substantial relief in the delay at that intersection. But it is quite a crossroads there out there right now.
On the signal, on the traffic signals, will the upgrades be of the nature that they'll be on an interim basis for the master plan for that intersection, or just be specific to the lanes that are being put in by the applicant?
Probably for right now, it'll just be for the lanes that the modifications needed to account for the new lanes. Eventually, when the full configuration of the intersection is completed, particularly that last quadrant, then probably a major, there could be another project to upgrade the traffic, mast arms and things of that nature to really bring it out. So it's still in somewhat of an interim situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions for?
Yeah, this was. Oh, I'm sorry. Go. This was probably in the staff report, but I can't lay my hands on it. What's the difference between build out as it's zoned now, I guess medium density residential, in terms of trip generation with what's proposed? I saw what was proposed.
Yeah, I don't.
Was there some kind of comparison?
We didn't run that type of analysis on that. Sorry.
Wayne?
I don't know whether this is your ballpark or not, Jerry, but this water reclamation line, was that what I understood that to be? Slide 64?
Water reclaim line?
Yeah.
Yeah, was it 16-inch or is it?
Right, the little blue arrow there where they're
It's a different department, but I'll take a stab at it.
Great. I'm trying to start to understand, there's going to be some development to the north of this piece here, correct? It was identified as stone something or other?
Yeah, part of the stone water.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another vacant tract to the north, on the north side of the road. Yeah.
So what I'm having a problem with is, why is one corner of this intersection being expected to be responsible for something that seems to serve all four corners? Why isn't somebody else involved in the cost of connecting this?
I think that because I think it's shown on our master plan, reclaimed water line master plan is being located on that side. Again, in the right of way, we share a lot of different types of utilities. One side could be water reclaim, the other side could be the actual domestic water line. So trying to put one on one side and one on the other kind of helps balance out how we use the right of way. I can't tell you. I think the water line, and I think the reclaimed water line, it may be much easier to go on this side of the road than maybe the other. I just don't know, but there is some balancing act on how we use that right of way. And but again, everybody has, whoever's there first, kind of starts the system. Unfortunately, and that's it's almost similar to analogous to doing road improvements. Kind of first one in helps solve a lot of the issues already that exist out there today. So other than that, I'm not sure, Mr. Rogers, if I can answer that any better.
Is this just commonplace, or is this unusual?
Yeah, it's fairly unique. Okay. Now, we've had a case just up the road where there was a daycare that wanted the reclaimed water line. They didn't want to have to pay for it all, and they wanted to locate it on the other side of the road. And I believe that council action was that they allowed them to do that, but it only put in partial cost of the reclaimed water line. So, but again, there's avenues for them to seek some modification to that if they choose to do so with council.
Can somebody point out where that reclaimed water line is now? I mean, is it connecting to something, or are they the first ones to start?
I want to say I believe it's also was built by UNC Wellness Center, and is also, I think, built by the Evans Road Townhomes. That's also located along this street. I think they also extended that as part of their project.
And so what they're not wanting to do is extend it through that intersection.
Well, I think they're only obligated, well, I can't,
The applicant's prepared to speak to some of the conversations that they had with our utilities engineer. If you'd like to hear from him, he can offer a little insight on this.
I'm just trying to figure out if they don't do it, how does it get done? And, where is it going? I'm not clear on that.
Right, so the existing reclaimed water line is coming from the west side in front of the wellness center. We're proposed to connect to it along that blue dotted line. We are proposed to build that whole piece all the way up to the intersection. Public Utilities would like us to extend it beyond the intersection across the triangular piece to the east. That's the portion that we're not prepared to do.
Is there already a line, though, on the other side of the road, and now we're just not going to have a connection? Or?
It's on beyond the triangular piece further down.
Yes or no?
And so there will be no connection unless the town...
Well, at the time of the development of the triangular piece, we proposed that it be done then as part of that portion.
And for clarification, when you say we?
We propose that it be done.
That they do it.
Right. Well, the applicant is also the owner of that piece in this particular case, so they're proposing that when they come to develop that, they will take on that task then.
And I guess this is a question, well, else there for discussion about how to make sure that happens.
Oh, it's fair game.
I mean, so if the applicant was to sell that piece of parcel, I mean, how do we convey that responsibility, or is that something we could put it in as
No, you can't work that into it. That's a separate piece of property. So it would be the responsibility of whoever owns that property to meet the town requirements at that time.
I wonder if we're just getting confused by this diagonal arrow, because you speak of the triangular piece to the east, but that
They would have to connect. That's part of the issue, right?
But the connection is to the east.
So it's not diagonally across the intersection, it's simply horizontal.
Yeah. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's this piece right
Yeah, just looking at that, though, it looks like the bulk of the value of those two pieces of property is in the one that's being proposed tonight. So that would concern me a little bit, because that's a pretty big expense for that very small triangle to take on.
How far are they going this far?
And if I may address a few of the traffic concerns that were brought up. The site triangles of our site, our buildings were all located outside of any site triangles on that corner. Additionally, I just want to make sure everybody followed that we are proposing 4 lanes on O'Kelly Chapel Road and 2 additional lanes on Green Level Church, along with the signal modifications. We feel like this provides additional storage and complies with the traffic analysis, which helps address all the traffic concerns. Additionally, on the right-of-way, on the portion of Green Level Church widening below, we have been in talks with Jerry Jensen last week as far as we are agreeing to build the gap widening for the town upon reimbursement. So we have been discussing that with Jerry. Obviously, there's a lot more that's got to happen for that to follow through, but we are in talks with them on that.
Does anyone have any other traffic questions? I would love to see Mr. Jensen get up one more time. If not, then anyone else with a traffic question? We have been, for the last few years, and some of us here on this board, trying to make sure that the cumulative effects are dealt with, despite, as the applicant just told us, their impact is going to be mitigated fairly well. But everybody doing their piece doesn't necessarily address the cumulative impact, as we heard earlier. So I know we've gone around about this, and I know it's, even though there's some of the efforts have fallen short to try to put this in and codify it. But, and I apologize for putting you on the spot. Okay. What's your comfort level that the overall cumulative impacts will be satisfied someday? Not necessarily by this application. Right. But do you feel pretty good about that?
Well, I think, there is some certainty in that there are some other related improvements that were going to be done by the public school system when they came out here. That actually was some quite extensive improvements all the way from Yates Store Road over to Green Level Church Road. They made commitments to basically 4-lane the roadway and then add another turn lane here at O'Kelly. And they also agreed to do some improvements on O'Kelly at Highway 55. So I think the school in itself, which we know is coming online, they'll be open with it, by 17, that those improvements coupled with what this applicant is wanting to do, I think goes a long way to solving the issues along O'Kelly Chapel Road. And there are also, and I think there is some level of confidence that there is another development, Evans Farm Townhomes. They've already done theirs, so that's going to, even though it doesn't have any benefit right now, when you couple that with what the school is doing and what this applicant is doing, it makes it a comprehensive road widening from a pretty long segment along O'Kelly. The third thing I want to say is that which I touched briefly was Ridgefield Farms as part of their zoning case, and they are pushing forward right now with site plan approval. They've agreed to do a lot of restriping on Green Level Church Road. We have a lot of widenings that occurred, but the outside lane was basically striped out because there was so many gap widenings in there, and it was just basically a de facto right turn lane going in developments. They're going to be going there and remarking all that for 2 through lanes along Green Level Church Road for a substantial length, particularly from O'Kelly Chapel Road almost to get to McCrimmon. So we still have some gaps in there on Green Level Church Road that haven't been developed yet, or a town project hasn't conceived in doing those improvements. But I think there are substantially going to be a lot of improvement along Green Level Church Road just by that improvement, plus the fact that they have agreed to do another turn lane, through lane going northbound on Green Level Church Road at O'Kelly. So I think and I believe there is a lot of certainty that those developments are moving forward, all within about the same time frame. So I think it gives us a little bit of comfort that I think once it's all complete, we will have some substantial improvement in moving traffic out there.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
But because it's quite difficult right now. Yes.
Any other questions on traffic? Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions about some of the other issues?
The trail?
In this case.
You haven't addressed that. I didn't. Was there a condition?
No. The applicant showed the location of the Greenway Trail. We wanted to just clarify they are not obligated to construct it. They are obligated to provide the easement. They do need to make the connection, which they have agreed to do, to the existing neighborhood Greenway Trail connection to Horton's Creek to the south, and they're obligated to the multi-use trail along the street frontage in lieu of sidewalk. So they're meeting all those requirements, but they just wanted to make sure that it was clear that their proposal is to comply with the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan criteria to provide the easement for the Greenway Trail.
So the trail that runs to the west, I guess that's the UNC Wellness.
Right now, there's no trail yet, but there is an easement. The UNC Wellness site did provide an easement on their property. So what we would be looking for as this proposal goes forward is the ultimate location for future trail here or easement to connect, to line up.
Okay, so removing that champion tree is not necessary if they're not.
It is necessary if we're ever going to get that trail in there, yes, because it's not just the tree, it's the critical root zone of the tree, and it would impact that even if they had a meandering trail.
Okay.
It's an 18-inch twin oak, so it measuring both segments of the tree puts it over the champion tree caliper requirements. So They were hoping that it wasn't going to be classified as a champion tree and not need to ask for this, but it did meet the criteria. So it is something that needs to be addressed now, or else they would have to come back and go through quasi-judicial public hearing process at the time of site plan.
Right. Okay, so the trail that runs north and south, that's part of what they have to do. But
Right.
the one that runs east and west,
they have to provide an easement.
Right now.
They don't have to construct it, but they would need to provide the easement for it.
But was there some new condition offered tonight?
The fence.
The fence.
Right.
Okay.
And the exact location of the fence has not been finalized, and the applicant needs to verify. They said that they would match the style and the height of the existing fence with the UNC Wellness. So we just need to clarify exactly what the dimensional standards are on that.
And I thought I saw somewhere that they had changed the location of the gathering.
There was a stamped concrete gathering area in this corner, and now what they're proposing is benches, so they've minimized the amount of the gathering area. Council didn't seem to think that that was an ideal location for a gathering area because of the close proximity to the two major thoroughfares, but there are two, trails that come together, the multi-use trail and then sidewalk. So they've proposed to retain some minor pedestrian gathering area in that area and just reduce the impacts to streetscapes and just provide a couple of benches.
Okay, yeah, I agree. That's not a really good location. I mean, I guess the object of the game here is that we provide a place maybe for the people who work in this office and daycare to go out and sit. And I doubt seriously they would go out and sit at that corner.
But if you're on a greenway trail and you're stopping, just to tie your shoes or check your time, then it does, it does give you an opportunity to do that. But yeah, that removing the stamped concrete area and allowing more room for landscaping seemed to be a better fit from council's perspective. So the applicant modified the plan slightly to address that.
Yeah, I was just looking at that where the trails intersect down at the southern end. Seems like that would have been a more logical place, but whatever.
So what do you say we stay on greenways and fences and trails for a moment? Does anyone have any questions about that? Well, since I brought it up. I just want to make sure that we're straight on some things. You had mentioned just a moment ago, we need to address the champion tree now. What exactly does that mean?
Well, as part of the rezoning process, I mean, whether or not you have any concerns about it, or if it's something that you have an objection to, council would take that into consideration with the preliminary development plan when they make an ultimate decision on it. But the proposal is for there to be a greenway trail through this area at some point in time, and so staff expects the applicant to comply with that requirement and dedicate the easement. So it may be that the easement gets dedicated, but the tree stays there for a while until it's time to install the trail. Right. But the applicant would like to have it clarified that when it's time for that to go through, that they don't have to come back to a quasi-judicial public hearing with their site plan so that the town can put the greenway in.
I see. So going with the plan as is sort of a de facto allowance for that champion tree to eventually be removed when we go to the greenway trail. Otherwise, if someone was adamant about keeping the champion tree in place, we would have to redesign to go.
And it's also that critical root zone also impacts the parking area as well. So it's a tight site with a frontage on the two thoroughfares.
So as far as the fence goes that's been proposed, I'm looking at the fence in an overhead view right now over on the property to the west. And it appears to me that the easement for the Greenway Trail is on the home side of that fence. Is that correct?
If this is the fence here, and I'm not sure, I can't, is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, it appears to me that the fence is pretty darn close to where the parked cars are. And I'm using...
I'm not sure. I'll have to verify that, yeah, because I don't have a site plan for the UNC Wellness property, and that's about the closest aerial I've got.
So the idea would be, if that's the case, then this Greenway Trail would then be on the southeast side of the fence, and the fence would remain intact. So is that
the exact location of the proposed fence has not been vetted yet. What we'd like to do is get the discussion going about the fence and then be able to talk with our parks planner and the applicant and see what their thoughts are about the location of it and what's ideal in terms of, there's some mixed feelings about having a fence adjacent to a greenway because it creates a claustrophobic feel. It's also more desirable to look into the woods and not necessarily see the fence, but because there's such a limited area and so little vegetation, especially around the pool site and in the backyards of these houses, it seems as though the fence is going to be something that is necessary here to get that opacity.
And there was a council person who was concerned about that too. So theoretically, if some of the homes there put a fenced yard in, you could have a fence on both sides.
True, yeah. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, what's important is if you've got concerns and observations about the fence or misgivings about it, or you feel good about it, make sure that we've heard from you so we can include that in the staff report as this goes forward, even if there's still a few things to be finalized.
Any other questions?
I was thinking at first, too, that I would prefer the fence for those residents to be closer to the parking lot. But you're right. Then if you do a fenced-in yard, you've got a little alleyway between fences.
The other thing to consider, too, is if you put a fence up near the parking lot, then you've still got maintenance issues. So you've got the owner of the fence then owns the buffer on the south side. So, it's they may be looking at putting a fence at the property line.
Well, my concern would be if anybody in that daycare or the medical facility wanted to walk on the greenway, if there's a fence there, they don't have access to the greenway. So then you come into, do you put a gate or what have you? So I don't know if that...
We would want to make sure this stays open. There would definitely, we would expect to see, the fence would be for privacy. We would want to make sure that there's no closure there on that access point from the neighborhood to the greenway.
On that, as I look at the site plan, I know that the applicant's not proposing to construct a greenway, but the site plan shows that there'd be access on by the site entrance on the Green Level Church Road side. Is that correct? So it's not like it's being totally blocked off, whatever they have for screen, but
any other questions? About anything in particular?
Yeah, just one more. Back on the gathering place, because we have this drawing, does that mean if they were to decide to move that somewhere else, they would have to go back through a similar process to this, or is there's some flexibility
They
to that?
explained that they did not really have much space to work with the topography, and I know the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong, but their feeling was because of the multi-use trails and the greenway easement that was meeting the requirement for community gathering. They didn't, at the town council meeting, they didn't really see that they had a reasonable alternative for a gathering spot on the property, because they've got retaining walls and topo, challenges.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes.
I understand that if it was just a daycare center, this would not be a rezoning. So there potentially could have been a daycare center with a parking lot there anyway, without a rezoning.
Correct. It could have required a special use, but not a rezoning. Daycares are allowed in residential zone districts.
But the fact that there is a parking lot behind them now and not houses that could have also potentially been there brings up the point of lights. Are they going to have lights shining in, down, and on their house now also? Because I do feel for the people there that have the concern with the office building looking in, they're going to have to deal with parking lot lights.
We do have requirements per the LDO for screening and shielding.
Okay.
Right, just to follow up on that, Town of Cary has a pretty significant requirement for lighting, 0-foot candles all along the border of the properties, much like the wellness site is now.
Okay.
So we haven't gotten that far yet, but of course we plan to comply with the Town of Cary regulations on that.
Okay, thank you.
And if they built medium-density residential, that could have been 3 stories high, right?
That's true, 35
Could have
feet.
been 3 stories. There was some concern about a 2-story building, but by rights, anything that would be put there could be 3-story.
Correct. Or 35 feet.
35 feet.
Any other questions?
I have one question. It gets back, and I don't know whether you can speak to this, but back on the request for an exemption from the requirement to extend the reclaimed water line eastward, and I don't have a map of of that utility system in front of me, but what was staff's thoughts on that? Is that a critical connection? I mean, what is it? It's connecting from a 10 to a 16, so I'm assuming that it's...
Our observation was that they were making the connection to the west by the wellness center site, so we felt that they were going to be able to be served, but we felt in the greater interest of the community, we wanted to seek the connection on the other side as well. Ultimately, the applicant stated they felt it was cost prohibitive to make the connection for such a small area in more than one location. So their request is to comply with the requirements along their property frontage.
So that connection would be from the corner of the property line is 300 linear feet up Old Kelly Chapel Road to the east. Is that where they would have to go 300 linear feet? To make that connection?
In this general vicinity, yeah, this is, I believe that's, the applicant can clarify that for me too. Your question was the distance that they're asking for the exemption from?
I'm looking at, so there's a termination right there at the corner on the property.
Yes, that's correct. I believe it is about 300 feet. I don't have it quite in front of me, but it's from the end of the dash line all the way across the other side of the old Green Level Church right away. So it comes straight across and connect on the other side. This is where the connections.
So is it going, I'm looking at the blue double arrow there, so is it going diagonally across that intersection?
No, the blue double arrow is not right. It should just go straight across.
Goes straight across.
Yes,
it goes east-west?
Yes.
Okay. Goes east-west, then it picks up somewhere probably on the other side of that triangular
Correct.
lot
If you
there.
can see on the diagram shown here, the old right-of-way for Green Level Church created that triangular piece, and the reclaimed water line is on about where she's showing it there. So it's
okay.
We'd have to continue on across. The big expense would be crossing Green Level Church with that water line.
Perhaps another clarification may be in order, and it's just I'm picking up on it as the questions are asked. Exemption from off-site extension. Is there an obligation? Is there a requirement for that water line to go that extra 300 feet? And are they asking to be exempted from what would be a requirement?
Yes.
I don't agree with that we are required to extend beyond.
We will
Green
need to
Level
have
Church.
somebody from utilities here for the town council meeting to clarify that, because my understanding was it was a requirement. So I will get that clarified.
Okay. My understanding was it was our obligation to build across our frontage, but not to extend it.
I will get that clarified as this goes forward.
Thank you. I think that seems to be an important clarification for some of us.
Yeah.
It is. It's real important to me, yeah.
Do you have any other questions? I just have one last one then. Would you mind walking me through the departures from regular buffer requirements that these 3 homes immediately to the south with their back properties got an exemption? You alluded to that.
They were part of a PDD. They were part of the Horton Creek Planned Development District.
Okay.
Typically, if residential is abutting residential and the homes are 8,000 square feet or greater, they can have a 20-foot landscape area rather than a buffer. And looking back now 10 years later, with those parcels on the this subject property not being developed or being developed at R40. R40 is really a holding zoning, so without really knowing what was going to go there, by today's standards, we might have looked at that and said, you need more buffering. We certainly would have looked at buffering by the recreation site and required more buffering there, because we learned over the years when you have a neighborhood recreation site with a swimming pool, it's not so much the protection for the people at the pool, but it's the noise and the activity at the pool that can disrupt the adjacent neighborhood. So today when we look at a planned development district or a preliminary development plan, we actually look for buffers between uses to help with the transitions. But it's not as though there was anything wrong with that 15-foot landscape area had it developed as a medium-density residential product to the north. But along 2 major thoroughfares at that intersection, the land use plan didn't recognize that as being an ideal site for a residential development or similar residential neighborhood.
And the other homes to the west did not have that same landscape area. They went with a more traditional buffer on whatever that property was, correct?
The other homes to the west, you're talking about the same neighborhood, or you're talking?
Mm-hmm.
No, they've got the 15-foot buffer requirement as well.
There's only a 15-foot landscape
area,
that
right?
exists along that entire corridor. So it's the I guess the wellness property that's actually got that larger buffer in place. Just looking at the overview.
Oh, right, yes. UNC Wellness, yeah. These lots, they only have a 15-foot landscape area on their rear.
That's the entire section.
For the whole Hortons Creek, correct.
Okay, not just.
Yeah, this was the UNC Wellness had that fairly large land area in there that could provide the buffering.
Thank you. That makes it very clear. Does anyone else have any questions? Before I ask for a motion, I would just like to have you, if you would please, Ms. Grannon, restate the additional conditions so we know exactly what it is that's part of the package we would be making a motion on in one way or the other.
The applicant has proposed to provide a opaque fence that matches the design of the fence provided at the UNC Wellness Center along the southern property line, with an access or an opening for connection to the neighborhood Greenway Trail connection. The exact location of that fence has not been finalized yet, but that's something that would be presented to the council.
Thank you. So with that in mind, does anyone care to make a motion? Can't say this has ever happened before. One can make a motion in one way or the other, I would point out.
Well, what the heck? I'm still going eeny, meeny, miny, moe. I have some issues with this, and I'm going to make a motion to deny, and we'll see where that takes us, how we go. We can have the discussion and then see where it sits. I move that the board forward case number 15 REZ 06 to Town Council with a recommendation for denial as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and denial is reasonable in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
There is a motion to deny. Is there a second?
Okay, people, you have to get off the fence, so to speak. One or the other.
I second.
There is a second. Discussion, please.
Okay, so, I think the uses are reasonable. My issue is with the unknowns at this point. The big one to me is the gap on Green Level Church Road to the south. We don't have a reasonable expectation that that's going to be fixed, and that, in my opinion, is a huge issue because it's not like we're sitting there waiting for that land to develop. It's already developed. They've already paid their fees. I know there's some talk about what, they're trying to work with the town, but I would like to see those discussions finished before we do this, because there isn't a comparison, but I suspect that medium-density residential would not be nearly as intense a use as daycare and a medical building. And the other issue to me is the reclaimed water line. I understand the financial impact. I get that, but when I look at what that leaves it for that small triangle of property, which if it's not financially feasible for this property, it's definitely not for the other property. So even though they're the same owner now, that's not really something we could count on. And then the question of the fence, it's a question that's not big enough for me to try to deny something. I think it's the Green Level Church Road issue and the reclaimed water line. And my intent would be to simply send a signal that those things need to be resolved before it gets to Town Council.
Mr. Randolph.
Well, for me, the biggest concern is traffic. I know that our resident expert said that he was fairly confident with the traffic mitigation that was currently underway with the school and the state coming in to help develop this to 4 lanes. But I'm not so sure that the proposed plan is going to actually mitigate the concerns with Green Level Road and O'Kelly as they have proposed. My other concern was the office space. Not sure it really fits into the design of the area. I know that daycare is an appropriate use for the space as currently zoned, but to me the office space, in light of the surrounding land use in that area, is not appropriate.
Any other discussion on this motion to deny?
If I could interrupt, prior to your vote, the applicant has said that they would withdraw the request for the waiver to the reclaimed water line if they felt that's important enough to not let this get recommended for denial.
It's important, but it still doesn't solve, to me, the really big issue, which is the whining blow. And I understand that it is unfortunate. I wouldn't expect them to pay for it, but the solution he was talking about, which was they would do it and be reimbursed, sounds reasonable, but I'd like that in place before this actually happens, so or some similar agreement. So that's still my holdup.
So if there's no other discussion here, I just want to point out that we're voting either for or against denying. To vote against denial does not mean you're approving it. This is a motion to deny.
I do have a little worry that the daycare center would be allowed there, but would the office be allowed there? And it really is a residential area. Would I want a residential area backing up into those 2 areas, intersections? I'm a little confused about that myself.
I've got to make a comment here. I think we're overlooking the fact there's a wellness center, a pretty huge wellness center to the west. My God, what is that?
Right.
Yes.
That's right. I think traffic is my biggest obstacle here, but I respect Mr. Jensen's opinion that it's in the works, and it's going to be worse before it gets better, but I think we have a plan, and I agree with Carla that the south side of O'Kelly is, I think it's O'Kelly, is unfortunate, but it is what it is, unfortunately. So I think that the proposed office and daycare are a good use for this piece of property. I don't like the champion tree being removed, so I'm kind of repetitive about that tonight. But I understand why. So I will not vote to deny. Is that right?
Well, I think I'm going to pipe in here, too. I just don't understand the issue about this office, small building, being not contiguous with what's going on here. The other thing that troubles me about this particular case from a generic standpoint is I'm old enough to where I think about whose problem is this, and it seems as if the town of Cary is putting a lot of burdens on this developer. Not that I have any love affair with this particular developer or the development, but the champion tree issue, that's something that Cary's Parks and Recs are kind of forcing the issue for, even though we're not going to exactly complete the trail quickly. As far as the traffic problems are concerned, I've been looking at Google Earth here for the last hour while we discuss this case, and you've got 3 southbound lanes at the north side of this intersection, and then Cary comes along and tells this housing development, well, you really don't have to expand the lanes south of O'Kelly Chapel Road. Cary also tells the developer that you don't have to put these typical buffers in here. We're going to take it out of the individual landowner. And I'm looking at those 4 lots actually, that are adjacent to this proposed development, and it does look as if something has been planted there. How recent this Google Earth thing that I'm looking at compares to what is actually in the neighborhood, I don't know, but it seems as if there's some larger specimens of trees along that back property line. And the fence issue, I'm confused as heck on that. I don't really see the value to this either way. I would like to support this issue, and I will not vote for denial.
Does anyone else have any contribution to the discussion? Before I call for a vote, I saw Ms. Glover stand up. Is there any guidance you want to provide us before we go pull the trigger?
Well, I just wanted to clarify with the applicant, and they have clarified. So as you're voting on the plan in front of you with the fence, as Ms. Grannon described, and without the request for the reclaimed water waiver. So that is a firm change from the applicant, and they are no longer requesting the reclaimed water waiver. So as you vote, just keep those 2 things in mind.
All right. So with those 2 changes to the conditions in mind, we'll go by a show of hands here. Would all those in favor of denying the motion please say aye and raise your hand?
Aye.
1?
Aye.
2?
3.
3? I see 3. All those against, please raise your hand and say no. No.
No.
And I have 5. So the motion to deny fails 3-5.
And can you please do someone so inclined to a motion to approve, just for the record, so we're clear?
Sure.
Beat me to it.
Can we try it?
Yes.
I move that the board forward the case 15 REZ 06 to the town council with a recommendation for approval as consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and is reasonable and in public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation, subject to the following conditions offered by the applicant. 1, which was the opaque fence with access to the neighborhood trail to be determined, however you wonderfully worded it. And 2, that the reclaim waiver will not be requested. Is that appropriate? Okay.
I will second.
Discussion, please.
I agree. I'm glad you point that out to me, that this is a use that is, I think, consistent to the land directly to the west. And I think the office and the use to the west is a good use for this land. I do have a little problem with I like what they're doing with O'Kelly and opening that up. For now, it's just going to be extra parking spaces, but that's okay. There's a plan in place. And then the green level church, the north-south there, I think that is something the town needs to address and fix the overall problem. And so I am moving to approve it.
And I'll correct myself because it's Green Level Church and not Old Kelly that was the issue with the Horton. But I think for just the discussion that we had, that's why I support it. I appreciate the developer removing the waiver for the exemption on the wastewater or the reclaimed water line. So I will support it.
Any other discussion on this motion?
Obviously, I'm not going to support it, but, and, you know, I do appreciate the reclaimed water exemption being removed. I just think because of the intensity of these uses, I approve of these uses. I think it's a good place, but because of the intensity, I think we really need to resolve that issue of the gap to the south, the immediate gap to the south, because the town is going to hold some responsibility for that. So, you know, I'd like to see that resolved before this moves forward.
If no one has anything else, I'll just chime in and say that I personally put an awful lot of weight into what our professional staff says, and Mr. Jensen made me feel much more comfortable that the overall traffic considerations for this entire holistic area are being dealt with, and this does not constitute an undue burden on anyone else coming down the road. And speaking of coming down the road, if there's one thing that has been drilled into my head in my 2 years on this board is that when there is a rezoning case before us, we certainly cannot ever anticipate what the adjacent properties will rezone themselves into. Just because it's R40 doesn't mean it's R40 tomorrow. It could change. Well, this is flipped on its head, and we have Hortons Creek made decisions based on the assumption that some of those R40 slivers would go residential, and the same thing applies. You just cannot assume what some other property owner is going to do with their property. I'm sure the Hortons Creek area was rezoned at one point before they put that in. So those two things are what affects the way I make my decision. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? If not, then I will call a vote once again by show of hands. All those in favor of approval of this rezoning case, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed, raise your hand and say no, please.
No.
No.
3, no. So motion passes 5-3. Thank you very much. Before we move on to our 3 cases without a public hearing, I would like to see if we should take a 5-minute recess. Usually at the 2-hour point, I like to see that happen. So if I hear no objection, I don't think we need to vote on something like that. We can just take 5, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. This is over, and we are back. We will now go to our 3 cases that do not have a public hearing. So we will begin our first case, which is round 33 of LDO text amendments. Ms. Bierman, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Before you tonight are the round 33 amendments to the land development ordinance. You may recall discussing these at your work session on October 12th. There are 4 amendment items in this round listed here, and I'll go over each of these briefly. Item A includes 5 subparts, and all of these changes are needed to comply with recent changes with the state legislation. The specific items are listed here related to aesthetic controls, the removal of protest petitions and privilege licenses, some changes related to bona fide farms, and some minor wording changes and requirements related to performance guarantees. Item B concerns quasi-judicial review of site plans. Currently, when considering waivers or modifications of a development standard that where council must take action, then council is required to take action on the entire plan, even if the plan otherwise could have been approved administratively without the particular modification being requested. This amendment would allow council to take action on just the modification in such cases and not be required to review or take action on the entire site plan. Item C includes 2 changes to the town center zoning district. These changes are related to outdoor display and sale of goods and perimeter buffers. At the public hearing, there was a 3rd change that was included, and we just discussed this briefly at the work session. That change involved a minimum lot size in 2 of the sub-districts within the town center. However, as we have further reviewed that, we have determined that that change is not needed. And in fact, the current dimensional standards should remain in place in order to ensure consistency with some of the more detailed notes that are found in the town center area plan. And finally, there are several more minor changes listed under item D as technical and minor amendments, and I can go over those individually if you like. I would point out that there is a further revision that we've made to section 5.1, again based on some recent changes in case law related to how we address unlisted uses. The specific revisions to these to the wording that we're recommending has been provided to you in a handout. And that concludes staff's presentation, and we'll be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from Ms. Bierman on the LDO amendments? If not, would someone care to make a motion?
I will.
By all means.
There's no case number, though. I move that the board, that the board forward text amendments PL 16015B to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hanson, while you're making your motion?
We worked through this, and it makes sense to comply with the state legislation, the new laws that were passed, and to just streamline in a continuing effort to make things as efficient as possible with your department and for everybody concerned.
I agree. I do remember that at the town council meeting, the mayor had requested that some wording be inserted that kind of indicated that we didn't really agree with it, that was being forced on us, but I don't know if that happened.
I was going to say, not that we agreed with all of it, but.
But things being what they are, I'll vote for it.
Any other discussion on this? Well, then we'll just call this for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. On we go to 15 REZ 12.
Thank you. This is a rezoning request for approximately 4.27 acres located at 917 Waldo Rood Boulevard. Subject property is shown here on the south side of Waldo Rood Boulevard to the west of Davis Drive. Aerial view shows the subject property. Mostly vacant. There's an existing dwelling on the property shown here. According to Cary's GIS maps, the site is not impacted by any stream buffers or floodways, and field determination will be required at the time of development plan review. This shows you the location of multi-use trails in the vicinity of the property, but there are no issues with Cary's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan. Waldo Rood Boulevard is classified as a major collector. Land use plan designation is office and institutional. The existing zoning is residential 40, and the applicant has proposed office and institutional conditional use. Conditions proposed by the applicant would limit the use to animal service uses, including a veterinary hospital with an office and with an outdoor kennel, kennel indoor only, and if there is a kennel, indoor, outdoor kennel, that should actually say indoor kennel. I'm sorry, I just realized that. So a veterinary hospital and office with an indoor kennel only, and if there is an outdoor kennel, that would be subject to a special use. Also, they would allow office use, business or professional, and limit the maximum building size to 18,000 square feet. Property owners within 800 feet of the subject property were notified by mail. The property was posted. At the town council public hearing, there was one speaker, and he was a representative of the adjacent daycare center who expressed some concerns about the health and safety of children in the adjacent daycare property. So in response to those concerns, the council just asked for a little bit of clarification about some of the requirements. And if this were to function as a veterinary hospital, there would be no kennel outside the principal building. There would be a requirement for 200 square feet of outdoor enclosed yard per 1,000 square feet within the principal building. That yard area enclosed by a solid decorative fence or masonry wall, at least 8 feet tall. Structures would be required to be insulated and soundproofed. And if an outdoor kennel is proposed, that would require approval by town council of a special use permit. So that would go through another level of scrutiny if an outdoor kennel was proposed. So this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is available to state the request again or offer any additional input, and then I'll be available for your questions.
We'll now hear from the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Don Mazzell with Withers and Ravenel. Here on behalf of the applicant this evening, Mr. Randall Dunn. Mr. Dunn is here with his wife this evening. Also joining me is Lofty Smith, our project engineer, also with Withers and Ravenel. Staff did a great job summarizing our request in the staff report. I just want to hit a few highlights of that staff report. Of course, the land use plan does designate this property as future office and institutional. The adjacent use that's developed next to us, the daycare, is also already zoned office and institutional and in use as a daycare. So those two things certainly support our request to rezone to office and institutional. In addition, we offer some conditions to the rezoning application to make sure the size and scope and scale of what could be developed there in the future would be consistent with the daycare and consistent with the neighborhood in general. We capped it at 18,000 square feet. Not sure if the property will actually yield that much or not, but that's where we capped it at. So we think those things certainly support a rezoning to O&I in this location. We had a neighborhood meeting as required by the town of Cary. Didn't have any attendees at that meeting. However, the gentleman who owns the daycare was out of town, so we didn't get a chance to meet him until the public hearing. And staff did go over some of the concerns he had. As a follow-up to that, we met with Mr. Dunn and his wife, and representatives from Withers and Ravenel met with the daycare owner, talked through some things, really kind of educated them on the rules and regs that go along with a use such as a veterinary hospital, if that were to be the use on the property. Some of the regulations that guide how those operations work. Also shared some things about the intended conditions on the property. And, you know, like a daycare, if this is developed as a veterinarian hospital, the health and safety of the clients and those that are being treated, whether they're animals in this case or, you know, kids at a daycare, health is paramount for both operations. So good conversations. I think they went away satisfied that the use proposed or possible use proposed would be in keeping with, you know, the general area and would not be a health concern to their operation. With that, we're all here to answer any questions you may have. But again, I think we've settled the neighborhood concerns on our own. So thank you.
Thank you. Have we any questions for the applicant or for Ms. Grannon at the moment? I have just one.
Okay.
Shows I'm paying attention. We just passed some amendments to the LDO. One of them addresses the minimum requirements for a veterinary hospital to have 200 square feet of outdoor for every 1,000 square feet of indoor, and eliminates that provision. So where at this point is this? Are they locked into having that because the
They
LDO
would be
is still in
subject to
place?
the ordinance at the time of their development plan approval, so, or when it's submitted. So if the ordinance gets approved by town council and the rules are relaxed, they'll be required to comply with whatever the rules are at the time they submit their development
So
plan.
they're not locked in at this phase?
Right. Nothing I stated right now is a zoning condition. It's just what the current ordinance states.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, if that's the case, would someone care to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 15 REZ 12 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and the presentation.
I will second.
Discussion, please.
I'm very familiar with that site. It's over the last 25 plus years I've driven by it hundreds of times. It's in the area where I live. I was at the site on Saturday and trying to picture what would, I've always thought about what would go there, what would be compatible. On the north side, it's a railroad track. It's a funny little juncture. Funny, you know, it's a unique piece of property. It's not funny, but and I think it is, I could never see where residential would work there because of limited access, and I think that a veterinary hospital would be a good use, or a small office there. There's a residential development going across the street, and I think the sort of traffic flow that would be being generated there would work with the school. There'll be some additional buffer. Actually, I was thinking about more from the school side. There's a railroad track on the back side of that property, which is going to require its own buffer by the in addition to the property line. So I think it's a good use for that piece of property.
I think I agree with Dan. I like the comment that the health and safety of children and pets are about the same. And since I don't have kids, pets are very important to me. And I think it's a good use for this land.
I also want to comment on, it's always impressive to me when there's collaboration between parties. And I really do appreciate the fact that the applicant, you know, has made effort to work with and address the concerns of the that have been expressed. So.
Yeah, when I think about the concern of the daycare next to that, I mean, I think about how many vet offices are actually integrated into shopping centers, and the sidewalks are full of kids and, you know, people. I mean, to me, it's a non-issue. I understand, you know, it's good that they brought it up and discussed it. So, no, I think it's a very appropriate use for the land.
It once was a horse rescue place, so I think it's appropriate that a vet hospital goes in there now.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We now move to our last of the day, which is 15 REZ 20. Once again, Ms. Graham.
Thank you. This is a request to apply an overlay district to approximately 73.17 acres. This is the first property located straddling the Chatham County, Wake County line off White Oak Church Road. The land use plan designation is low-density residential and very low conservation residential. The existing zoning is residential 40, conditional use. There's a number of existing zoning conditions. They are not proposed to change. The use is limited to detached residential and neighborhood recreation. There's a town of Cary Greenway easement and buffer along the western property line that exceeds typical LDO requirements. The applicant is simply seeking to apply the Conservation Residential Overlay District to this property. This is something that they had asked for on their initial application. It was an oversight. It was not included in the staff report, so this is to come in and clean up a recently approved rezoning. So no changes to the previously approved zoning conditions. Notification went out to property owners within 800 feet. No one attended the community meeting. There were no questions or concerns other than one citizen just wanting to verify exactly what was happening, but she was actually here for another meeting. So it's as I said, just administrative cleanup to apply that Conservation Residential Overlay District. They still would have to comply with all the open space requirements and be scrutinized during the site plan to make sure they're in compliance with that. But this at least gives them the opportunity to ask. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Have we any questions for Ms. Graham? Is the applicant here?
Good evening again. Glenda Top with Glenda S. Top and Associates. I can't really add anything from what Ms. Grannon said. It's really a cleanup, and no changes are being made to the zoning conditions. As she pointed out, no one came to the neighborhood meeting except those of us representing the case, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll ask if anyone has any questions. Well, if not, would someone care to make a motion on our final case of the evening?
I'd be glad to make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 15 REZ 20 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's a nice housekeeping item for the end of the night.
As good as any.
Good comment. Ditto.
Well, I won't prolong this any longer. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. I do not believe we have any new or old business, do we? No reason to go closed session. So the last motion of the night could be?
I motion to finish the meeting.
Is there a second for the adjournment?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you all for bearing with us this evening, and good night.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.